So next I'd like to introduce our next speaker for the session that we're going to have, which is a personal narrative across the continuum. So I'm very pleased to introduce Harleen Marwa, who is a medical student from the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Please join me in welcoming Harleen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I ask that you bear with me as I'm recovering from a cough. So my name is Harleen. I'm a third-year medical student, and I have the great privilege of standing between all of you and lunch. So what defines one's identity? As I prepared to moderate today's session, I turned to my good friend Google for an answer. Ralph Waldo Emerson attributed our identity to our passions, or perhaps our annoyances, when he said, "We all boil at different temperatures." Shakespeare believed that our identity came from within when he famously explained, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." And perhaps my favorite and most fitting answer came from an unknown author who wrote, "Clothes may disguise a fool, but the voice will give it away." Thanks again for tolerating my voice today. Today's personal narrative session will be focused on a myriad of factors that influence the formation of our identities. We will be hearing from a junior and experienced clinician as they reflect on how their learning environments have shaped their own identity formation and where there may be opportunities for positive change. With that, I'd like to invite our speakers for today's panel up here. We are so excited to be joined by Connie Barden, the Chief Clinical Officer of the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. And we are also excited to be joined by Alexandra May, a cardiac registered nurse and founder of HeyAmazing.com. Let's give them a round of applause. Welcome. So why don't we have you both begin by sharing some brief remarks about your personal journeys?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexandra May. I'm a new grad registered nurse. My journey has been very non-linear. I went to University of Maryland, College Park. During my senior year, a nurse practitioner came to a public health course that I was taking. Originally, I was a double major in biology and criminal justice, and then I became solely a criminal justice major pre-nursing. And anyway, a nurse practitioner came and she explained how she lowered the infant mortality rate in Santa Clara, California. And I didn't realize nurses had the ability to work not just at bedside, but also within the community as well. So that inspired me to pursue nursing. I applied to nursing school the day after she came. And my mom was like, "Oh, after 4 years at University of Maryland, now you want to go to nursing school after all of that." But the journey was great. I don't regret going to University of Maryland beforehand and then deciding nursing school because it provided some format of how I wanted to pursue my career going forward. So I went to nursing school, had a teacher come up to me and explain that I should be involved in New Jersey nursing students. I was like, "Oh, okay, sounds good." I ran for a position after my first conference, and I became breakthrough nursing director, which basically meant I went to different high schools and spoke to the students about being a nurse and what it was like. After that, I became president, and I was able to speak to nursing students more so about self-care, because during my nursing journey, everything was put on the back burner in terms of taking care of myself between clinicals, going to class, studying our horrible exams, trying to figure out which orange is the most orange. And it became very stressful. So I learned that I was working best when I implemented self-care at the forefront. So that's how I got interested in nursing, and that's how I started developing a platform where I speak about self-care through my blog and social media sites. And now I work as a cardiac registered nurse in the emergency department and also post cardiac catheterization patients. So I'm enjoying the journey so far and blessed to be here with you guys today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Connie Barden, and as she said, I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. In case you have trouble remembering who's the new one and the old one. I'm the one with glasses and notes, just in case there's no other way to distinguish the two of us. My journey was quite different. I never studied criminal justice, that's for sure, but I'm feeling quite safe being right here. I was in school, and about a couple of years through my undergraduate program, the advisor said, well, you can't go as an undecided major for 4 years. You must pick something. And since you like science a lot and you're doing well in that, have you thought about nursing? And I said, sure, sounds good. That's my Florence Nightingale story. Anyway, never looked back, never regretted it for 1 minute. That was at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I got out of there. I was lucky enough, in retrospect, to graduate in the midst of a nursing shortage, because what that meant is that I could go and be taken as a new graduate right into critical care, which I thought I was interested in, but I wasn't certain. And they took me into the CCU, and it was just really a wonderful experience. I was there for a couple of years. Don't worry, I'm not going to chronicle the entire 44 years, but a couple of highlights that I wanted to point out that have to do with professional identity. From there, after 2 years, so still a pretty novice nurse, life took me to Miami, and then I worked in a community not-for-profit hospital, 500-bed, good-sized hospital, but left the university setting and went to community setting, and boy, was I not prepared for that. Night shift, 2 nurses, 8 patients, no physician to be seen. A whole different world in terms of me finding my identity and me finding my feet under me in terms of being a confident practitioner. Anyway, I went back at about year 7 to graduate school because I knew not only what I wanted to study, but the role I wanted, which was clinical nurse specialist. And a great advantage that nursing has is that we don't have to get matched and paired and hope and pray, and you can kind of find your place and go and get it. So I moved to a place where I knew they had that kind of education, became a clinical nurse specialist. As was said earlier, first I acted like one and then I became one. And I would say that is my professional identity as a clinical nurse specialist, despite the roles that I've had. And that's involved a total of 44 years in various critical care settings. And another important juncture was my association with my professional organization, American Association of Critical Care Nurses, which really was another whole part of my development. I learned that I couldn't expect the academic environment to give me everything, and I found that my professional organization could really augment that. Worked in different roles in patient safety, tele-ICU, and about 5 years ago, this job as chief clinical officer came up, and it's my first time outside the walls of a hospital to try and do my craft. Still a well-disguised clinical nurse specialist, now being a chief clinical officer.
Thank you both. So you talked a little bit about the different experiences that shaped your ability to practice as a confident practitioner. Can you talk a little bit more about how you developed those skills? Was it from a formal training, or was it from various experiences you had? And did you shadow anyone more experienced in the field than you that also contributed to your confidence?
For me, it's been a mixture of formal training and also learning as I go along. So when I first started, I began on my unit in September. It's 2 weeks of computers, learning the system, seeing what's going on. And then from that, I've been paired with a preceptor for about 12 to 14 weeks. So she showed me basically how to be a real nurse, because in school, we learn everything. You're doing all the care plans, looks great. But once you're on the floor, it's a completely new world. And I'm like, okay, wow, I'm a nurse. Now I have to figure everything out. So as my preceptor, I was able to learn the ins and out of my unit. I work with a lot of post-cardiac catheterization patients, which means they have stents put in. So learning the care for that. And also our unit is an observation unit. So we get other patients, whether it's neurostroke patients or people who are being observed post potential heart attack. So with that, she had to teach me different things specific to my role. I think I've also learned from a non-formal approach from how to interact with other people on the unit. So seeing how the nurses speak to different physicians, case managers, because there's always an unspoken, okay, this person, when he comes to the unit, he's going to want to know this, this, and that. When you pick up the phone, you have to know the blood pressure, the temperature for this doctor, or maybe you just need to know this and that for someone else. So I think the combination between both of the formal and the informal training has really helped me, because when you're on the unit, it's real life and it's different from the books. I had my first code about 3 months ago. No, 2 months ago, and it was my charge nurse's patient. I walk over, the patient had vasovagal, so basically had cardiac arrest and fell over at the same time when he was using the bathroom, the commode next to him, and ended up cutting his nose. So there was blood everywhere, and we had to go save the patient. So when I'm looking, the first thing I do is get the code card, but I see the patient. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm a nurse. This is me. I have to fix it. And it was that in that moment where I actually felt like I was a nurse. Before it was like the role. So in that moment, when the code team comes, we're all trying to save the patient. I appreciated that everyone on the team was very interactive and helpful. Nobody said, why don't you know this? Why don't you know that? You learn about the code card in orientation, how to open up something, how to push a medication, but it's completely different when you're in the moment and you're like, oh my gosh, we really need to save this patient's life. So I appreciated the informal and both the formal types of mentorship and apprenticeship learning through being a nurse, because I'm able to apply what I've learned. And in my environment so far, it's been a pretty safe learning environment. So that's been helpful so far.
And I would totally agree about combination. When I got out, was a new graduate, as I mentioned, and so they had no business turning me loose in a CCU. And thankfully, there was I think a 6 weeks course for everyone new into critical care at that time, but a blended approach. So you had some classroom theoretical things. You certainly had to learn how to read arrhythmias and all of that, but you were back and forth between there and the clinical environment. That was really, I'm learning nowadays, luxurious, because we at AACN, where I work, we're getting all kinds of pressure with give us resources that people can have, and we want you to turn them into ICU nurses like in 2 or 3 weeks, and it takes time, certainly, for that. So it was very luxurious that there was a lot of classroom time and very supportive environment. But I will tell you, if I only had to pick one thing that I think made me successful at that time, it was the culture in the unit where I went to work. And the reason, as I was thinking about this and how that shaped things, it was just 2 things. Number one, it was a learning culture. We were in a university setting, but it was just everyone wanted to learn and get better. And the second thing is it was a fun environment. People had fun together. We laughed and we did all kinds of crazy things, not inappropriate for the most part things, but it was fun. It was fun being at work, and people learned together. And I think that really made a difference. I had a colleague who also, as a new graduate, got out and got accepted into the SICU. She had a very different experience there by chance. They say all culture is local. If you look around wherever you work, the environment in the labor and delivery suite is different than the environment in the ED. It's different from the SICU and the trauma unit, and on and on and on. So I just got lucky going into a unit that had a very fun learning type of environment, and it was hugely supportive to me. As far as shadowing a senior nurse, I think they probably shadowed me more than I shadowed them, just to keep an eye on this new one and what the heck she was doing.
So I'm hearing from both of you that the importance of culture in building confidence during your formative years. And as we've talked about earlier today, culture is often influenced by leadership and comes from how role models set examples. So I'm curious, what has been the role of mentorship in shaping your professional identity and establishing the types of goals that you've set for yourself in your careers?
I think mentorship has played a great role. All the positions that I've had, whether professional or just within my unit, it's been because someone said, hey, Alexandra, I think you'll be good at this. I think you'll be good at that. So with having a mentor, formally when I first started nursing school, who told me about New Jersey nursing students, it allowed me to be on this leadership path that I didn't really know existed. When I first started nursing school, I said, okay, I want to go to nursing school, graduate, become a good nurse. I didn't think there were so many other opportunities that would be open to me. So I think that mentorship was great because someone who's already been down that line can show you different things that's out there. And within the hospital, mentorship has been good. I have a pal which is someone, another nurse who wasn't your preceptor, who kind of grabs you takes you under their wing and shows you the unit, the culture, and how to address certain situations. So I think the mentorship has been pivotal. Also with the American Nurses Association, they just started a mentorship program. They connect you to a nurse who's in your area. So we meet often for lunch, and we just are able to talk about things going on in my unit in a safe environment where it doesn't feel like, oh, if I tell her this, I'm gonna be penalized. So for me, mentorship has played a great role because you don't know what you don't know, and people can lead you to different routes that are a huge opening door. I think that's really important to pick everyone's brain and see what to do and just bring me to the path that I've been on.
I would say I've probably been surrounded by a number of accidental mentors more than intentional ones. So probably the purists would say they weren't really mentors because you didn't call them up and make a date and all that kind of thing. But I have found a host of people who have really enriched my learning along the way. And they just seemed to come along at the right time and were willing to interact and I would say take an interest in me and my learning journey and whatever I was pursuing at the time. Clinically, that certainly has been the case. You find what you need at the time and go after it. In my leadership journey, I would say a lot of that has come from not necessarily right inside the walls of the hospital, but again, professional organization where you get to interface with people from all over the place and all different kinds of environments. And I have found that to be hugely helpful in my journey.
So it sounds like the big themes we're hearing here are safe spaces, a positive culture, and a strong community of whether that's leadership or learning. I'm curious now, on the flip side, what were the negative factors that may have influenced your identity formation? And if those negative factors were occurring, was there anything that was also offering you protection in that space?
I think my first negative experience, it happened, I was putting an IV into a patient, and a physician called me to ask something about one of my other patients. I had a total of 6. And I didn't answer the phone quick enough. So he calls and he says, "What are you doing? Why are you not being a good nurse? You can't figure out my question." And I'm juggling a lot of things in my mind. So anyway, I'm talking to him and at this time getting very downtrodden. What's going on? So I didn't say anything, went home. Then I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I thought of everything I could have said back at that moment. And in that time, I said, I never want to feel this way again, and had to voice that to some of my manager in a way. How could I approach that situation where I didn't have to take it home with me? Because at the end of the day, we're working to collaborate with each other, and we shouldn't have people, no matter what your role is, we're all working for the patient and we want to work together. So how could I have approached a situation where we could sift through the negativity and the words that were being said so we can have a better outcome for the patient? And with that, I learned later on through a mentor that there is a line that we can call within our hospital where if somebody continuously says something or is not acting the most professional, you can let somebody know and they can get spoken to. But through that moment, I realized I need to speak up when there is an issue, and not necessarily to the person in the moment, but figuring out a way so bullying doesn't isn't persistent. Because when I told another nurse, she's like, "Oh, he's just like that." But for me, it really hurt my heart as a new nurse because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to help the patient. So I think in that moment, that could have been a negative. If I took it with me and just said, okay, next time I'm not going to say anything, and didn't address it. So I'm glad that we had some avenue to be able to say, this is what happened, how do I fix it? And I felt comfortable telling my manager, because that could have been a negative identity formation in the sense that I wouldn't want to speak up in the future, which could be the difference between a patient getting the care they needed or not.
You know, something you made me think of, Alexandra, that I hadn't thought of till listening to you is the instances of negative interactions, I guess, and how I have responded to them over a career trajectory. So I remember being a new nurse back in Chapel Hill and very, insecure in what I knew and just learning and so forth. And if a resident, what I recall as a resident here and there, barking at me about about something, and my assumption was, well, they're right. I don't know what I'm doing, and that was a stupid question, that kind of thing. And I would just try and learn to do better, and that was the way it was. And as I grew over time and had a different role and had more confidence in my thinking and my judgment and my suggestions and my actions with patients and families, I found I had the ability to use that voice. And it was certainly heard in a different way when I had the confidence to back it up. But I think those types of interactions, depending on where one is in their trajectory, their confidence level and their clinical knowledge, certainly can be hugely different depending where you are. The other thing that I think in terms of that everyone is at risk for in terms of negative identity formation has to do with anything related to patient safety. I remember it was in my first 2 years of practice sometime in there, so a long time ago, but I remember being in a code where I made a mistake. And it was also back in the day, we're talking the late 70s, where you coded just about everybody. I mean, there were very few DNRs back then. It just didn't have the awareness of end-of-life issues like we do now. There was a person who nowadays would never have been coded and so forth. But I made a mistake only in terms of, because I was new, psychomotor, that kind of thing, I did the stopcock wrong. And the IV pump kept going off. We couldn't figure out why one drip wasn't going in. And I discovered later that it was because I had turned the stopcock the wrong way. You know, the things that are so simple now that are not simple when you're in the first year or two of practice. And so I fixed it, and things started going well, and the patient died. So what I did was tell no one. And yet it's significant that 40 some odd years later, I could tell you the room I was in when it happened. I could tell you, not her name, I don't know her name, but what the patient looked like and the whole thing about the case, and how I had to work through convincing myself that she was terminally ill and she was going to die anyway. And I had to sort of treat myself that I'm sure your error wasn't the only thing that caused her demise. So I escaped that just fine, but I often thought about, what if that would have been a young, viable patient? How would I have dealt with that? And this was, like I say, the tail end of the 70s. We didn't talk about that kind of thing. Who knows who was making errors and that kind of thing in the environments I was in. It just happened, and people went on and that type of thing. So I think I do believe that the patient safety awareness now is such a huge breakthrough in terms of transparency, in terms of understanding that we're all humans and therefore mistakes will be made, and the support that we get given and the non-punitive approach when it's appropriate, which it almost always is when errors are made, I think makes a huge, huge difference, because otherwise people can really be traumatized from medical errors for sure.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I'm reminded of my first exam as a first-year medical student, turning the blood pressure cuff the wrong way and wondering why I couldn't get someone's blood pressure. So a little different, but completely understood. So in terms of how you gained the ability to move forward into leadership, what sort of experiences helped prepare you then to be a leader and to be someone who is able to talk about, where you had mishaps earlier in your career and how that's informed how you practice medicine now?
For me, it happens every day through interacting with new people that I've met here, older nurses, some of my mentors. It's helped me figure out how I want to be that nurse in the future. And I think the most important thing that I've learned is that the leadership is continuous and learning is continuous. I'm currently in school now for a leadership and management program at Drexel University. And everything that we're learning from semester to semester has been changing based on different advances that's going on in medicine. So it's interesting to see how what I'm learning now is carried out and impacted in real time. Whereas in undergrad, it felt like I was learning to figure out pi just for the sake of figuring it out. So now it's been very helpful to be able to see how the leadership having a leadership role plays out in real time in terms of how employees and staff feel empowered on the unit, all the way to seeing how directors roll out new initiatives. Does it actually work? The managers who are actually on my unit and are there in the trenches with me and in real time that are showing me what to do. Their leadership is not just sitting from a table saying, do this and do that. Seeing them interact with us and knowing, okay, this is the problem that you're facing. Let me not just write a piece of paper and say, this is how you solve it. Let me understand what's actually going on in the unit so we can help you solve it. So learning how leadership has multiple faces, but at the end of the day, it's really about connecting and collaborating with the people that I'm working with, and my managers connecting and collaborating with all of us. Because when it's just do as I say, I don't feel like it's that much of a progress that can happen. When it's everyone working together and saying this is what we should change, from whether it's transport all the way to the CNO, it's been very helpful to see how leadership plays a big role. And just my growth right now, trying to learn how to be the best leader I can. And I think in forums like this, it's been very helpful to hear everybody else's perspectives in all their different roles so we can apply it later.
I would say that I realized I had an accidental leadership thing in my second job where somebody deemed me head nurse. If anyone remembers those days when that's what you called the nurse manager, you basically did the schedule and had to cover the sick calls, and that was it. No budget, no nothing like that. Even that I didn't like. That's the good learning from that sort of weird thing was that I realized administration wasn't the place for me. Clinical was my love. But I also had a learning that it wasn't the job of the healthcare institution, the hospital, so to speak, to teach me how to be a leader, and that I needed to figure out ways to do that. One of my biases is it was my professional organization that gave me that. I got involved through the chapter level and some of the more local things, and then eventually on the national level of AACN, and then one day was president. But the experiences that gave me, suddenly my world just grew. It just exploded because I wasn't just talking to the people back home. I got to meet nurses, in this case from all over the country, way smarter than me, who were doing incredible things in all different kinds of environments. And I learned mightily. People on that board always called it's like getting a master's degree in leadership. And you didn't even have to take a test. You just had to show up and bathe yourself in the learnings of other people. So I think sometimes you have to look for what you want and look outside of. It's not the obligation of the healthcare institution necessarily to develop you fully into the professional that you want to be. So there are other places to do that.
So while I'd love to keep picking your brains for the wealth of wisdom you have, I'm going to open it up to the room and see if anyone has questions for our panel. I think we have time for about 2 questions. So if anyone wants to make their way to the 2 microphones at either side of the room.
They're waiting on lunch, so we, just saying.
That I might ask, since you both kind of the start of your careers and where you are now, if you could go back in time and give yourself any advice to kind of make the transition easier, what would that advice be?
I would definitely tell myself not to be too hard on myself. Don't worry about the perfect GPA, doing everything perfect. Everything literally works out at the end, and it's been more important to live in the moment and enjoy the experiences of each day. Because the days that I have the most knowledge behind me are the random days when I learn something new. And it's not, okay, I did this task and that task. It's when something happens like, oh, I can do this differently or that differently. And at the end of the day, no patient has asked me my GPA or what grade I got in nursing 105, but they want a genuine, happy nurse. And I think that telling my younger self, don't be too hard on myself about everything. We're in such a goal-oriented world. Do perfect on the SAT, do perfect on the NCLEX, do everything like to this great degree. While it's great to get the knowledge, it's also good to have the humanity and the love behind it and remembering why I wanted to become a nurse in the first place.
I think I would say be prepared. Where you start out, it doesn't all look like that, where you're going to end up. And that was so we're talking about starting out in academia and then ending up in community hospital settings and a whole different world there. That actually is the place where I spent most of my career. Who knew? I didn't even know it existed. I thought everything was like, where I started out. So just be open, say yes, look for what calls to you and do that. Life's too short to do something else. Just look at where your passion is and just run it down and get it.
Hi, thank you. That was excellent discussion. I'd just like to make a comment about patient safety. I come from a 32-year career in aerospace, and one of the things that in aviation, safety is equally as important as healthcare, so there's a lot of similarities there. And one of the programs that NASA had for pilots was they could self-report incidents, and when we take a look and do crash investigations and everything, yes, there's pilot error involved, but the reality is that they're typically system issues. So what we really need to do is get people to self-report and get the data out there in a non-punitive environment so that we can address the safety issues so that they don't happen again. Because in a punitive environment, they're going to continue happening because we're not addressing the true root cause. So I would just encourage everyone from the standpoint of the healthcare field to really look at these issues as an opportunity to make sure they don't happen again by full disclosure and root cause corrective action.
I'd agree. Healthcare is trying to catch up with other industries like aviation completely.
Great. Well, thank you both again for your time today.
Thank you.
I think we can agree this has been an insightful conversation that will help inform our table discussions this afternoon. So before we break to lunch, a few things. We're going to return at 1:30, and you're going to go to the table number that matches the number on the green sticker. And then before we break for lunch, I'm just going to invite Charlie up here for a quick announcement. Thank you.
Thank you. You may clear the stage. So yesterday we had our storytelling session. We were expecting 5 storytellers, but one of ours got stuck due to travel and weather delays. So if you would please join me in welcoming our colleague Beverly Malone, Chief Executive Officer of the National League for Nursing. She will share her story with us now. So welcome, Bev.
Thank you, colleagues. I really enjoyed the presentations all day. I want to just start. I'm Bev Malone, and I used to be a clinical nurse specialist, Connie, back in the day, and I had the whole hospital. I'm psychiatric mental health nursing extraordinaire. And so I was at the hospital, and they called me in and said, there's a unit that's having some problems. There's a nurse manager there. And so I went up to the unit. It was a neuro unit. And that's a very difficult, high-level challenge unit to work on. And the nurse manager said, well, I've got this problem with 2 nurses, and I need some help on it. And I said, well, ask me. I solve problems. And she said, well, the 2 nurses, they happened to be, one was a RN, and the other one was an LPN. And she said, they're not speaking to each other. I said, well, how long has this been going on? And she said, 3 years. And that was not the worst of it, colleagues. The unit was divided right down the middle, sort of like Moses did the Red Sea. And all those for the RN were on one side of the unit. All those for the LPN were on the other side of the unit. And if you missed a day at work, somebody called you at home to say, let me tell you what happened today. It was as the world turns on Unit 34. And so all of that was wrapped up, but inside of it was some racial issues because the RN just happened to be white and the LPN just happened to be black. And so you couldn't tell whether there were role issues or races. They were all tied up together. So I said, well, let me talk to them. And she said, you can't do that. They may hurt each other. I said, well, I'm a psych nurse, throw a few chairs around, gets my blood going. I'm fine with that. And she said, oh, they may hurt you. So I just want you to know I took myself and I stepped up and I set my colleagues in the same room and I even closed the door and I said, how did this start? They had no idea. 3 years, they could not remember, but they had a list of everything the other one had said about them in the last 3 or 4 months. And I said, well, okay, how do you feel about quality patient care? Both of my colleagues pledged allegiance to quality patient care. I said, how do you feel about professionalism? Both of my colleagues pledged allegiance to professionalism. I said, well, I'm confused. I don't understand how you can feel that way. If I'm the LPN and I'm standing outside a patient's room and you're the RN and you're inside and you need assistance with a patient, you won't come in to help. And they said, of course not. We're not speaking to each other. I said, well, doesn't that affect quality patient care? Doesn't it affect professionalism? They said they hadn't thought about it like that. I said, the big question, would you be willing to change? That's always the question. And they said, keep talking. And so I did. I said, first of all, you don't have to love each other in order to work with each other. Sometimes in nursing, there's this idea, maybe it's in other professions too, that we have to be very close to each other and kind of go out after work with each other and love each other in order just to work with each other. I said, secondly, you don't even have to like each other in order to work with each other. And in nursing, we have a high likability scale. I mean, we score very high on that scale. And then my colleague said, okay. I said, but let me tell you what you do need. What is non-negotiable? And it's respect. You have to respect each other. And that is, some of my colleagues have already said it today. That's good morning. Can I help you? Please. Thank you. Just let's start with the basics in terms of respect. My colleagues looked at me and said, we think we can do that. I said, okay, let's give it a shout out here. Let's try it. And they did. And as the unit got healthier and better, it pushed out the nurse manager. And my thought about that is that we all don't know how to do things exceptionally well all the time. But you should know when you're drowning. I mean, the water gets in your lungs. You should know how to raise your hand before 3 years have passed, because it's affecting the patient care, not just the unit itself. And so that's my idea, that she had to leave because it was too healthy a place for someone who had that major disorder. That was my story. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you very much, Bev. I think that's a nice segue into lunch. We'll have some things to marinate on, and when we return at 1:30, we'll enter our second table discussions. Thank you.